Okay, so let's talk about Ips beetles. So Ips beetles there's a group of different species. Ips is the genus, and sometimes they're referred to as the engravers or Ips engravers. And these are bark beetles, and they are usually associated with weakened or stressed pine trees. And there are some species that only associate with the upper portions of the tree or the branches and smaller diameter stems. Some that are kind of found in the sort of mid portions, and some that are found on the lower part of the tree. And usually this correlates with the size of the beetle. So the larger species can, penetrate through the larger or thicker bark, and the smaller ones will be found in where you have the thinner bark. In general, the species is larger than the southern pine beetle and smaller than, say, the black turpentine beetle, okay? You can see here some specimens that we have, kind of what they look like. You can see they're a bit larger than the southern pine beetle, and you can see here an enlarged version, so you can kind of see what it looks like up close. It's kind of shiny red-brown typically, but a kind of classic-looking bark beetle. And how we identify these as Ips, it has to do with the galleries that they make, okay? These tunnels that they make under the bark. And they typically make galleries or tunnels that look somewhat like sort of the letter I or H or X. They kind of have these patterns. And it has to do with the fact that what happens here is a male will be found in here, and then 1 to 4 females will mate in this initial gallery, and then the females will make these longer chambers and will lay their eggs out here. And then the females, or the eggs, will hatch, and then the larvae will then sort of penetrate further as they are feeding. As the larvae are developing, they're feeding under the bark, remember, and they're feeding on that cambium. And then those little tunnels, those smaller tunnels, those secondary tunnels, get a little bit bigger and bigger as the larvae are developing, and then they sort of move out and eventually leave the tree, as they're maturing, and as, of course, they mature and become adults. But the primary gallery itself, can look something like this. You can see it's sort of like either an H shape or maybe an X, you might think. But sometimes there might be just 2 of these primary chambers. So it would be sort of like, like a vertical I, or sometimes it might look like sort of like a Y, because you might have 2 on the top and 1 on the bottom. So anyway, Ips look something like that. And here's some examples, some that we have collected. And you can kind of see those vertical main galleries, and then you can see the secondary larval tunnels going away from them, okay? And then here you can see the pitch tubes. So remember, bark beetles, as they're boring into these pine trees, the defense responses of the tree, they're going to be present to some degree, and so you're going to have little bits of resin coming out initially, and so you'll see some resin. And depending on the species, depending on how big the beetle is and how much defense there is, you'll have some, varying amounts of resin, and the size of those, what we call pitch tubes, will be present. So basically, that's the primary things that you're going to look for with these Ips engravers or these Ips beetles. Is the beetles that are sort of intermediate in size, the galleries, which have those, characteristic primary chambers, that have some vertical element that's X or Y or sort of an I shape in general, and then the pitch tubes that are present.